can't stay still. I'm weak as I'm progress. Can't escape from myself. Break all the mirrors. Don't be afraid of bad luck, 'cause it's the only kind we have here. Break all the mirrors. Don't be afraid of bad news, 'cause it's the only kind we have here. It's easy to pass judgment when you're first starting to live all on your own. No, you're not alone. You're just not leaning on the wall. I am a skunk repelling everything I find. Searching, not finding any shred of peace of mind. Is it courage to boldly admit to all I lack? Imagine phantom father is never coming back. Break all the mirrors. Don't be afraid of bad news.
Thank you so much to Homebrew Santa Cruz for allowing me that track Mirrors as my theme music. And you are listening to Unquestionable. I'm Dan Wu, here with a special post-election decompression episode. Today we are getting away from the politics, and we have two guests calling in from afar to talk about books they have written. We're doing a little book club episode here. Getting right into it, we have our first guest. We have Jon McGee, who is the Vice President for Planning and Strategy at the College of St. Benedict and St. John's University in Minnesota. Jon, are you there with us?
I am. Thank you, Dan.
Good afternoon to you over
Thank
there
you.
in Minnesota.
Things are fine in Minnesota, and I would be remiss in saying at the beginning that as the tragedies that Californians have experienced over the last week or so in particular are just, you're in the thoughts and prayers of very, very many people, including mine.
Thank you very much. And I have your book in front of me, Dear Parents, A Field Guide for College Preparation. Now, what inspired you to write this book at this time, considering that you've been helping others plan their college journey for many, many years? What sparked 2018, probably the last, I would guess, few years that you've been piecing together bits of this book? Why is this book coming out now after you've been doing this type of work for so long?
Well, that's a really good question. And it turns out that when you have 4 children, time eventually becomes your friend. And as you think about a book like this, I have 4 kids. I have 2 in college right now. I have a senior in college and a first-year student in college, a senior in high school, and an 8th grader. And so for all the years I've spent either studying and writing about, doing research about how students make their choice, why they choose college, why they choose us at the 2 institutions I work for, and even participating in events on campus like move-in day and various admission events. Now it's my own kids who are doing this, and I discovered as I was going through this with my oldest several years ago that all the things I thought I knew, I did know a lot about how the process worked, and I should have as an insider, but the emotional pieces of this in particular kind of came home. And so I thought that what I would do, or what I wanted to do, was write a book that could sort of lay out the process in simpler terms than I think it's often laid out, perhaps give voice to some parent concerns and issues, try to allay some of those concerns and issues on a process that's both really, that can be daunting kind of intellectually, but daunting emotionally as well. So the time was right because my wife and I were going through this very thing as I was writing it. So it was kind of a mix of what did I know professionally and what did we experience personally.
Now, it's interesting that a lot of the book does talk about the technical terms of how many colleges there are and what you know of how much they cost and acronyms that people will encounter during the application process. But I was much more interested in the more autobiographical and biographical bits of the book. And
Well, I think
the one thing that people concentrate on most with college, I guess is what I'm trying to say, is the cost of it. And there's an interesting argument. I want to start off with the argument that you sort of had, or the statement from someone when you were bowling that's in the book.
Why would I ever send my kid to college? And for him, it
and
was
that it's
less
not
about,
worth it, and that it's a waste of money, and
It's
that
a
we're
waste
just
of
putting
money.
people into debt without
Right.
getting something
Right.
finite or tangible out of it. And that's something that, growing up in a university town, I grew up in Santa Cruz and then ended up being a student up here. I have family members that saw the university grow, but they didn't go to college. Maybe they're in the generation that you talked about before, and we'll get to that as well. But how do you talk to people about the fact that you really see some sort of college as almost absolutely necessary nowadays?
Well, I mean, the easiest way, and for the guy on my bowling team, it was. I also noted this in the book. It was hard to say whether he was just trying to be, argumentative or not. He himself did not go to college. Usually the way I talk about that is there's two ways. One is that the economic returns to college alone are not ambiguous. Those results, on average, are in that going to college of some kind and completing college at some level has remarkable economic returns versus not going to college at all. And what I tried to do as well was to expand that argument to say college may also not be what you think it is. It might not be UC Santa Cruz or the College of St. Benedict or St. John's University. It might be a technical college or some other kind of two-year community college. I mean, those are all college experiences, and all of them, completion of any of those experiences has tangible economic benefits. The people who have completed college are far less likely to be unemployed, far more likely to earn more than those who didn't go to college, far more likely on any number of other indicators to engage and participate civically. It's not so much as just an assertion that they're better people. I didn't make that assertion, but just to say that the benefits associated with going to college somewhere are very, very strong, particularly when considered over the course of a working life, which now, for young people who graduate at age 22, their working career could span the next 50 years. And so, having the kind of college credentials, which, by the way, may not end at the at the point you receive either an associate's degree or a baccalaureate degree or even a master's degree, a professional degree or a doctoral degree. I think that what's happening is that people will have to plan to continue to learn throughout their lives, whether in formal collegiate settings or not, to continue to find their place in the labor market. But that part of it, I think, is unambiguous, and that's usually the way I talk to people about this. I live in a small town, a wonderful small town where it is Main Street America. People who've been to college, many people who haven't, and so this, I don't live where I live is not in some sort of bubble where all I would know is, gosh, where everybody can just assume the benefits of college. That's a conversation that happens not just at the bowling alley, but at the diner and in other places around town.
Absolutely. And on that note, what's the evidence that you see on whether those financial gains are evenly distributed amongst graduates? And I ask that because of the constant reminder in the news, and also if you know anyone, a lot of people know people that are saddled with the ever-present and ever-talked-about student debt that a lot of people that go to four-year colleges are weighed down with for a period of time. And the economic gains are always said as like $1 million over the course of a working career, as is said in the book, or a couple thousand a year, sometimes people say. But are those evenly distributed, or are we saddling a lot of people with debt that they don't pay off, and then other people are making huge financial gains out of those degrees and that they average out to those numbers?
Well, first of all, they're averages. To be sure, they're averages, and I acknowledge that in the book. And in fact, was quite clear about that, to say on average, this is what happens. I mean, there's no guarantee. It's the interesting thing in all of this. It was the same for you. It was the same for me years and years ago, that I didn't know what the outcome would be. My parents didn't know what the outcome would be. And so in that sense, when you make this choice to pursue this kind of experience, you're making a bet, and a bet on your own future. And it's not... The results, in fact, are not the same for everybody. But they're not necessarily just categorically different. They're different for a variety of reasons. They're different because people are different, because luck plays differently, because somebody lives in a place where there's more opportunity than there is in another place, that they don't, that the people in that place don't know about the place with more opportunity. When it comes to borrowing, which is a really scary question for lots of people. I think big debt burdens make great copy, but the extraordinary debt burdens across all students who've borrowed are relatively rare, and they're different at different kinds of institutions. In fact, it's not just four-year institutions where they're high. They can be high at two-year institutions as well. They can be very high at for graduate education as opposed to undergraduate education. My take on borrowing, though, is, and I would urge people to really think carefully about this. First, borrowing can expand your options. It's the same way. The same is true when you buy a car. The same is true when you buy a house. It can allow you to consider a wider range of schools. But the type of loan matters. Federal loans have better, lower interest rates and more flexible repayment options than private loans. You should keep in mind that the monthly payments on a loan typically total about 1% of the principal balance, so that as you're incurring it, you need to think about that. And finally, the last thing is, and I think this gets lost in the conversation almost entirely, is when you say people are saddled with debt, the problem is that we have to do a better job of taking on debt. Borrowing is, in fact, an entitlement. If you're eligible for a loan, you can take it, whether or not the college has packaged it for you, and that makes it both attractive and dangerous. And for me, the bottom line is that you should borrow only what you need, and you should think very carefully about what you need. And if it looks like you are borrowing more than you should or feel comfortable with, or you're comfortable with your ability to repay it, whether it's you alone as a student or your parents or somebody else, you really need to think about whether there's another collegiate option. The range of prices among colleges is really extraordinary.
It's true.
And you should think carefully about that at the beginning. So I don't have a kind of one-size-fits-all answer to this, but that is the advice I offer to people, and it's exactly the way my wife and I talk to our kids.
Now, just to remind listeners, you're listening to KZSE Santa Cruz. I'm speaking with author Jon McGee from the book, using as our premise the book Dear Parents, A Field Guide for College Preparation. Jon McGee is the Vice President of Planning and Strategy at the College of St. Benedict and St. John's University. And as he writes in the book, he will have children in college from now through 2027, I believe.
Yeah, from 2015 to 2027, and beginning this year, 2 in college for the next 5 years.
So he found that maybe he didn't know everything that he thought he knew after helping people plan for college for 20 years. I got to get back to this question with you. On the extension of the debt question, what's the biggest mistake that you see people coming to you making when they're planning, or the biggest mistake that you feel you've made as a parent so far in your role of your students going to college?
Well, let me do the first one. There's probably 2 parts to the first one. The biggest mistake. The one big mistake is to say, I won't even, especially, and you were asking about student borrowing, but even if it's not about borrowing, I won't consider a place because I can see the price, that the kind of sticker price that it charges, and I won't even consider it before applying. It's always good. First, you can apply. You can apply for financial aid and then figure out whether you're eligible for financial aid or what kinds of either kind of grants, need-based grants you get, or kind of merit scholarships you get. And I always tell families not to rule out a choice without having at least talked to the aid office or even applied. Because if you don't apply, you know you won't get anything. If you do apply, you at least have the opportunity to find out. As far as it goes with borrowing, I think there's two mistakes. One is to say, I won't borrow at all, and I'll limit my scope of search to something very, very small, when that might not be in the best interest of the student. But the other is just as bad, actually worse, are people that, and we see them in our financial aid offices at schools around the country, people who just say, just show me where to sign.
And they're just dead set on going to a certain school, and they
right.
just
and
will
they'll sign
borrow
off on
whatever
anything.
they need to. Yeah.
And I think that's I make the point in the book about college, but it's true about loans as well. The only bad choice is an unconsidered choice. And so you need to think carefully about that. As far as my own kids, I think in the end we probably didn't. One of the pieces of advice I have is you should talk really clearly with your kids about money, and framing the choice, and what you have available and what you don't. We didn't do that, I think, quite as well. Now, we get a number of chances at this because we have 4 kids, and we were better with the second one than the first one, and I expect we'll be better with the third one than the first 2, and we might be best of all with number 4. But I think that idea of just talking about, let's think about value. Although we did have a moment where my oldest son applied to a school where the cost of going there versus where he is, which is at actually the school I work at, was going to be well over $100,000 more over 4 years. And, my wife and I talked about this, and I said to him, Andrew, you can choose this other school if you would like, but you need to be able to tell me why you think it's worth 6 figures more over 4 years. And I knew this school well, and I liked it a lot, but it wasn't this. It was where he is enrolled is quite similar to this school, and he couldn't, and I knew that he couldn't, but I couldn't either. And so that was sort of a telling moment for us about value, to say, yes, we would stretch, but we have to have some sense in our own minds, however we came to that, about what the value of that stretch would be, that there had to be some significant difference to warrant that big a price difference.
All right. And we are talking with Jon McGee, author of Dear Parents, A Field Guide for College Preparation. Available
on Amazon and really at booksellers. It's online everywhere, but Amazon is usually the easiest place.
Gotcha. And we're talking about college planning, the mistakes people make, and some of the unexpected good decisions you can make because there's so many more colleges. You write in here that your parents were the first ones in their family to go to college, which I'm guessing was maybe in the 40s or 50s?
It was in the
50s?
late 50s.
Late 50s? Mm-hmm. So are you close with the other parts of that family from that generation? And how were the views different for yourself and your parents on college as opposed to maybe your grandparents who college was a completely foreign entity to?
Well, I think that's probably part of the answer. College was a completely foreign entity. My mother was an only child of Italian immigrants, and who believed that their daughter should go to college? I mean, I think they read the American story in a very particular way and believed that their only child, their daughter, should go to college, and she did. My grandfather, I never got to meet my grandmother, but my grandfather believed in that fiercely to the end of his life, and he was right. In my father's case, he's one of 3 children. He has 2 sisters. I think he was a very, very talented artist and went to school initially on an art scholarship in New York City. His sisters, at least certainly his older sister, I'm not sure about his younger sister, but his older sister, my aunt, was actually not encouraged at all to go to college because that isn't what girls did then, according to her parents. And those attitudes clearly are now just are long gone, and really appropriately long gone. But so by the time I was growing up, having both my parents gone to college, it was interesting because they never told, I have 3 siblings, they never told any of us that we had to go to college. But I think there was a sense, because our parents had, that we would go to college. I also grew up in a college town, and so there was the model there all the time. And in the case of my own children, again, we never told them they had to go to college or to a particular kind of college, but in their case, they literally have, virtually literally, grown up on a college campus. They go to high school on this college campus, middle school and high school, and participate in the events and activities and life of a college. And so for them, this is just what they know, which really brought into relief how hard it can be for first-generation students. I mean, how do you think about this when you don't have another frame of reference? And that was another, sort of angle I hoped that people would take out of this book, to just sort of describe what college is and what it is today and how it's changed and how you might think about fit and choice and money, and letting go, those kinds of things, because that may seem pretty clear to some people, but it's not at all clear to others, and it doesn't have to be so mysterious.
I guess my last question for you is, specifically, the name Peter Thiel comes through, and he's been just an all-out crazy presence in the world for a little while, especially the last few years, in my opinion. But you write about him as kind of a figurehead sort of this movement of people that say college only picks the smart and then pushes them further ahead of the people that maybe were a little behind them in their skill level or their job applicability. And how do you talk to people that are maybe very successful financially that are just very, very critical of the institution of college being so widespread, and just their money would speak to the fact that maybe it's not necessary, but maybe they're outliers? Sure. And how do you talk to those people? Some of them
are. I mean, if you're going to point to people like Steve Jobs or Bill Gates, who were brilliant people who didn't finish college, and you're going to say, well, anybody could do that. No, not anybody could do that. They're quite astonishing people.
And also lucky. They also
true enough.
are fortunate.
And the other part is a lot of the people, frankly, I don't find that often, in spite of what appears in major media sources sometimes, I don't find people that often who say college is just an utter and complete waste of time, especially in the case of some people who've been. Sometimes, in fact, my concern is that when people say college isn't necessary, they're not talking about their kids. They're talking about somebody else's kids. And that part I have to take issue with.
Interesting.
That, in fact, college, there are 4,360 colleges in the United States, colleges and universities, educating over 19 million people. And I think that the same college experience, in fact, isn't for everybody. And that's the beauty of, in fact, it's not even an American system of higher education. It's the beauty of just American higher education, that the choices are amazing. There are programs for anybody at any time at a variety of prices that can really, that done well, selected well, can help people hone skills and passions and interests that can make them remarkable people. Some of them get wealthy, some of them don't. I've always said to my own kids, do what you like so you like what you do. And I think it isn't always about making lots and lots of money, but it can be being happy and successful in what it is you're doing. And college can certainly help with that. The Peter Thiel line, it was hard to tell how much he was writing in the Washington Post op-ed piece, was just trying to be kind of argumentative.
He does that, yeah.
But, of course, he's got multiple degrees from Stanford himself.
That's a very great point and probably a great time to wrap it up. Thank you so much, Jon McGee.
Thank you, Dan.
For coming on and discussing this book, Dear Parents, A Field Guide for College Preparation. You're listening to KZSC Santa Cruz. We got our next guest coming up on this episode of Unquestionable. I'm Dan Wu. This is KZSC Santa Cruz. I'll be back in just a moment. You're listening to KZSE Santa Cruz. I'm Dan Wu. This is Unquestionable. You got Do Make Say Think in the background. Thank you to them and Homebrew for offering the theme music to this show. Here for another half hour. Got a second guest. Thank you so much to Jon McGee for coming on and discussing his well-experienced views on college planning and tips and mistakes that you could avoid. But it is the second week of November, and the elections are finally over after 8 years of campaigning. I think it was 8 years. Might have been 12. But I don't know about you guys. My sleep schedule is weird. I don't know who I am anymore. I have no purpose in my life at the very moment that an election is over. For a couple days, I'm just like, what do I do now? We've been arguing with each other for what seems like an entire reality show season, and I don't even know what to do. But my second author here on today's show, I believe is on the line, is Dr. Susan J. Noonan, and her book is Take Control of Your Depression, Strategies to Help You Feel Better Now. Are you there, Dr. Noonan?
I am. Hi, Dan. Thanks for having me today.
Absolutely. Good afternoon. And I guess it's probably almost dark where you are, considering that you probably have daylight savings switchback, huh?
That's right. Yes, it's about 3:30 where I am, and sky's beginning to fade.
Well, we proved that you can do anything at the ballot box in California, and we actually voted to have more sun. And it goes to the Mark Twain thing, and I say this because of your book, the depression thing, is Mark Twain's classic joke is everyone talks about the weather, but no one does anything about it. And we actually kind of did something about it, and I wish there weren't so many propositions on the ballot to talk about, because I wanted to make America sunny again stickers, but I wasn't able to do that. But we're going to get an hour of sunlight sometime. I don't know when they're going to actually make that switch, but we voted to do that. And sometimes that is a trigger for some people's mood differences, as many know, is just the darkness in winter combined with the holidays and all of those things. Sometimes that'll get to people. You're the expert, though, and in your bio that I got to advertise the book before I received it in the mail very nicely from you guys, was that as both a recipient and a practitioner in the mental health field, you've written this book, Take Control of Your Depression, Strategies to Help You Feel Better Now. I was hoping that we could introduce the listeners to you and say whatever you would like to as far as your role on both sides as a practitioner and a patient of sorts in the mental health industry, and how you got involved in it.
Oh, well, great question. Thank you. Well, I've been living through it, episodes of depression since I was a teenager, but I didn't actually receive professional treatment until I was in my 40s. It just wasn't done, at least not in my family. And then I received lots of different kinds of treatment, medications, talk therapy, all different kinds of things. It took a while to find the right combination that worked for me, and that's oftentimes what happens. And then I became interested in working with others who were struggling with the same kind of illness, and that's what I do now.
And so you began your training to be a practitioner in these fields and an author long after you had suffered with these things for a long time, correct?
Yes. Well, I was already, I had already become a physician. I just switched my focus and my concentration into psychology and psychiatry because I had my own personal experience in myself and in others in my family, and it seemed like I could offer a unique perspective that I was able to understand a little bit more about the personal and family issues and the challenges that we all face because I've been there. And that's a little bit different perspective, I think, that I was able to give.
And a different perspective I also see in this book compared to when I watch television and see prescriptions advertised like none other. I'm just old enough to remember the evolution to seeing so many prescriptions with very long lists of side effects advertised on television. It's interesting that you were a doctor in the physical sense before getting involved in psychiatry and psychology, because I don't see any mention of medication until almost 100 pages into this book. And I wanted to ask you about the structure of this book, because for the first few chapters I was reading, it literally just talks about diet and sleep habits and physical things that you can actually attempt to address first before medication. And I was wondering how deliberate that approach was for you.
Very deliberate, because those are all things that we can do to help ourselves that we have control over. When somebody has depression or even just a low mood, we don't always need to take a medication for that. Sometimes we do need medication. But in addition to a medication or talk therapy, doing the things that you just mentioned, attending to the basics of mental health with a healthy diet and sleep and daily physical exercise and keeping a routine and structure to our day can really help keep episodes of depression at bay and prevent them from being the worst that they can be, just tempering them somewhat. So you can do those in addition to receiving professional mental health treatment. And sometimes they may help you not have to go on a medication that has many side effects, as you mentioned. Sometimes if you do need to go on a medication, then you might be able to go on a somewhat lower dose, for example.
So I've never been on any medications for depression or attention deficit or anything like that usually relate more to psychiatry. And most people would advocate starting in the psychology field where you're talking through things and trying these more natural strategies at first before medications are entering the scope of treatment. At what point do you find, are there certain benchmarks that you feel when you're maybe working with someone on a psychology approach where it jumps into psychiatry? And on the flip side of that, do you feel that some in the American medical industry and community maybe make that judgment call too quickly?
The judgment call to use medications?
Absolutely.
Okay. Well, it really depends on how the person is functioning and how they're doing and how impaired they are by their depression. Because we all have ups and downs and stressors in our life. And if the downtimes last more than 2 weeks, if they're going on a month or more, and if they're really interfering with our life and our ability to function at work or school or socially, if they're interfering just a little bit, but we can still get to work, we can still take a shower and get dressed, that's one thing. But if we're totally unable to do that, we can't get out of the house, we can't get out of bed, we can't even, eat a meal, then that's a more severe situation, and that might call for a medication. Whereas in the first example, talk therapy might be sufficient. It really depends upon where the person is. It's a spectrum, and where they are on that spectrum and how impaired or impacted they are by the symptoms that they have. And that can change over time.
And I ask that because a lot of the side effects sometimes don't seem like side effects when I hear them listed. I actually listen to a lot of those when I see commercials. And I wanted your thoughts on something I've wondered, and I've kind of joked about it because it's a wordplay, but it's a serious question I have about a lot of antidepressants and mood-stabilizing medications, especially ones advertised on television, is that one of the side effects very commonly, without singling out any certain brand or anything, one of the side effects very commonly mentioned as a side effect is worsening depression or suicidal thoughts. And my question about it is, if something's meant to treat something and one of the side effects is the opposite of that, would you as a doctor consider that a side effect or a defect of the medication? Because it doesn't seem like a side effect if it causes the thing that it's supposed to fix.
That's a great question. And it seems ironic that something would worsen the thing that it's supposed to fix. What is going on there is that sometimes people can have unique reactions to medications, and it's due to their body chemistry and their brain chemistry. And it's really very difficult to know that in advance, to be able to predict that. So they put a warning like that on the bottle, that just in case you happen to be one of the ones who gets worse on this particular medication, then please stop taking it. Tell your doctor, because they certainly don't want that to happen. But that's probably a very rare situation, and the pharmaceutical companies probably do that just to cover themselves, because most of the time you don't really see that, coming along. And it's hard to put that in a category. Do you call it a side effect? Well, you're right in saying it's not really, but they don't know really what else to call it, so they kind of put it in that bucket, I think.
Okay.
The other kinds of things that are, side effects, whether they make you drowsy or that you gain weight or you get anxious or jittery on it, things like that, those really are more understandable under the term side effect.
Absolutely. And on those notes, those sometimes will cause worsening depression in the sense that sometimes self-esteem or social interactions will be impaired because of maybe anxiety or weight gain or over or under sleeping, making you less functional in your life.
A very good point, yes.
And how do you deal with that, and how often do you see that as a challenge to finding the correct medication remedy for people that you feel do need some sort of chemical aid?
Well, choosing the correct medication is sometimes a challenge in people, and it can be quite tricky. It requires a very experienced person who's a psychiatrist who deals with depression and depression medications on a regular basis. Unfortunately, a lot of people tend to go to their primary care doctor, and they start antidepressant medication with their primary care doctor for a couple of reasons. It's quick and easy. It takes an hour at a time to do talk therapy, and insurance companies don't like to pay for that when the primary care does that.
And the reason I ask that is because a lot of times when you get on the wrong medication for your particular situation, I've seen friends spend years bouncing around because then they have to have a process of getting off safely from certain medications, and maybe there's complications with a new medication that a psychiatrist may have a very strong hunch this is the correct one, but because you've been on this other one that you hastily acquired, that we now have to go through a process that's going to possibly make you in a worse mood for a while because it's just going to be a complicated process. And how do you deal with that?
It's hard. There are some data that show that about antidepressants might be helpful in only about 2/3 of the people overall, but 1/3 of them fail to respond, and only half of the people respond to the first antidepressant that they take at all, which means that after 6 or 8 weeks of trying that one, they have to turn around and either add something else to that or try another antidepressant. That takes another 6 or 8 weeks to see if that one's going to work. So it can be quite a long process of trying to choose an antidepressant medication that's the right one for you with your particular set of symptoms. It's really hard to pick and choose, and that's why it takes a very experienced psychiatrist to do that. There are some individuals who do achieve full remission, which is their symptoms have cleared, and you need to be very patient in the process to allow that to happen, and to allow the medication some time to work if you're a person who does need to try the medication route.
Absolutely. And just reminding listeners, you're listening to KZSE Santa Cruz. I'm Dan Wu. This is the show Unquestionable, a surprisingly unpolitical episode of Unquestionable. I've had 2 authors on today. The one on currently is Susan J. Noonan, Doctor of Psychiatry and Psychology, with the book Take Control of Your Depression, Strategies to Help You Feel Better Now, which is her new book. Just reminding you right now, we are in the middle of our pledge drive at KZSC. We're trying to reach a $30,000 goal, which would account for 1/3 of our funding for this period of the year. We do it twice a year. You can donate anytime at kzsc.org. It's all online now. But you can also call us and ask for assistance if you're having a little trouble with our new system, or you can just call and say hi and let us know that you appreciate the station and that you are in the process of donating at that moment. And my question now for you, Dr. Noonan, is why did you write this book, and who's the target of this book? Because there's a lot of things in here that are worksheets and charts for people to either fill in or make copies of. And I was wondering, is this more of a book for practitioners or patients? And on that note, many people that are depressed either are in denial about it or might not want to do such an overt act of buying a book that has worksheets in it because it highlights the fact that they do in fact suffer from these conditions.
Great question. Well, I wrote the book because I was being treated for depression myself, and I had a hard time finding a book that wasn't really, really dense and hard to read. Some of the books out there were 500 or 600 pages long, and when you have depression, you sometimes have trouble with concentration and focus, and it was hard for me to plug through some of those books. So I had a whole pile of notes that I would take when I went to a conference or a seminar on depression. So I decided to write a book that was going to be readable and usable for people who might have had the same situation as I went through, figuring I was not alone in that matter. It's written for those who do have depression or bipolar disorder, or bipolar depression. And it can also be read by their family members or loved ones so they can have a better understanding of what they're going through and what their challenges are. People who are therapists, who are mental health professionals, can read it and use sections of it, some of the worksheets or summary sheets that are in there, to share with their patients, or if they're running a group therapy session, to share with the group session. Now, if somebody's in denial, they might not buy any book. But if they picked up a book, the worksheets that you refer to in my book are not really very offensive or highly challenging. They're really quite simple, and what they do is they kind of walk you through a thought process of, for example, how to rate your day on a scale of are you depressed today? And if you're depressed, is it mild? Or is it a deeper depression today? Or if you're bipolar, are you feeling manic or hypomanic today? Or are you more in a neutral or depressed phase of it? What is your daily activities like? Do you, if you're feeling thoughts that are negative or distorted, a little exercise to discuss how to challenge those.
Right.
So there's simple things to do, and hopefully somebody might take a look at those and feel that they might feel like doing them.
And on that note as well, how overdiagnosed do you think mood-related medications are in the United States, given that they are much more prescribed here than in well, obviously not in the undeveloped world, but in most of the developed world, they are prescribed here at much higher rates, and there's a lot more commercial marketing of them. And how do you stand on maybe having less of these medications be the go-to solution for these types of conditions?
Well, there are 350 million people worldwide who have depression that we know about. 16 million adults and 2.2 million adolescents in this country per year. Now, those are the ones we know about, the ones who admit to it on a survey or go to a doctor with that diagnosis. There are many, many others who just never go for professional help that we never find out about. So it's a pretty common thing. And I know that
but medication isn't the solution for all of those things.
Do not jump to medications. So I don't know that it's actually over-treated. I can't speak for the primary care doctor's treatment of it. So I'm not really don't have the data, the statistics to actually answer your question thoroughly.
That's okay. I feel like there's definitely, I will admit, a portion of my opinion in that question, but I feel like it's pretty supported by the symptoms that I see in our greater society of people turning to chemical medications for almost every sort of ailment.
Well, there's a good point in that. Sometimes people jump to that rather than doing some of the things that we began the program with that they can do on their own, to try those first.
Absolutely, and that's actually the majority of your book. And one thing for myself that I found very interesting is the sleep habits. And we have a couple minutes left. I'm talking with Dr. Susan J. Noonan, author of Take Control of Your Depression, Strategies to Help You Feel Better. It's a book with all kinds of medical info on depression, solutions, and it even has a lot of charts and even worksheets that people can use or give to a close person that they feel may make use of physical aids and visual aids to help them maybe keep up a regimen to fight off depression. But the majority of this book is natural solutions that don't involve medication, and you talk a lot about sleep, and that's something that I've struggled with my entire life. I don't consider myself necessarily depressed, but I'm a chronic insomniac, and sometimes I wake up later than I wanted to because I stayed up super late, and then I'm just bummed with myself and I lay around.
Oh,
and then
dear.
and then the cycle happens the next day where then I'm not tired at night because I slept in so late. And what would you say to someone like that doesn't, I not like diagnosing myself or saying I'm depressed, but how do you see those types of things that a lot of people see as harmless, just weird sleep habits? How do you see those as a psychologist and a psychiatrist? Because you wrote at length about that in this book.
Yeah, well, weird sleep habits can happen for a lot of different reasons. And sometimes they can just happen because of our busy lives or different patterns that we have. Sometimes it happens on the weekends when we're out socializing And we kind of have to look at the person and look at the reasons why sleep habits are different and unusual. Sometimes it's just behavioral things, and it's just a matter of getting new sleep habits and new sleep patterns involved, making the bedroom reserved just for sleep and not for watching TV, reading a book, eating, working on your computer, doing work. Because the blue light from your computer or your iPhones or your smartphones or your iPads all interfere with your ability to fall asleep. The blue light from them, so that can keep you awake at night. A lot of different things that can factor into it. So you'd have to sit down with somebody who's knowledgeable about sleep and kind of look at the reasons why, and then what things behaviorally you could change, and then try and just reserve the bedroom and the bed for just a quiet area for respite, and then pay attention to falling asleep at the same time 7 nights a week and waking up at the same time 7 nights a week. Now, it might be hard to do at the very beginning because you might have some pretty tired days until you get into this nice new pattern. But then when you do, I think you'll feel refreshed and a little bit more energetic.
Awesome. We're going to end it on that note. Thank you so much, Dr. Susan J. Noonan, author of Take Control of Your Depression, Strategies to Help You Feel Better Now. Thank you so much for being on the show.
Thank you, Dan. This has been great. Awesome.
Have a great day and enjoy that last bit of sunlight over on the East Coast. This has been Unquestionable. I'm Dan Wu. You're listening to KZSE Santa Cruz. We're in the middle of our pledge drive. I'm not sure if I got any pledges during this show, but you know what? I know people are listening. So if you want to pledge to the spirit of another show, you can go to kzse.org and hit donate. Here's a little Do Make Say thing to take us out. We got Pixelation Destination coming up. It's been KZSE Unquestionable. Thanks for listening.